My name is Wren Calloway, and not long ago I sat at the respondent's table in a county courtroom, while a lawyer in a suit that cost more than my delivery van called me a kidnapper. His name was Preston Vance, and he said the words slowly, the way you'd set down something fragile so everyone in the room could get a good look at it. On the petition in front of him, the 3 children I had raised for 12 years of fevers, lunch boxes, and 2 in the morning were listed as my victims. Across the aisle, my sister cried beautifully into a tissue she never once brought to her eyes. It stayed folded in her fist, dry as a receipt, while she wept for a jury that wasn't there. Here is what none of them knew. Inside my bag, underneath my checkbook, sat a sealed envelope, 11 years old, never opened. A city inked across one corner in my own handwriting, the ink gone soft and brown at the edges. What happened when the judge finally slid a letter knife under that flap? What he read, what he asked me, and what I said back I'll get to. I promise you it's worth staying for. But first, let me ask you something, because you're going to be the jury tonight whether you want to be or not. If your sister left her 3 children on your porch and vanished for 12 years, and if the only thing that could win them back for good was a sealed envelope that would make those kids see their own mother differently forever, would you open it, hold onto your answer? You'll need it before the end. Let me take you back 12 years to a Saturday morning in June. I was 26. I rented a tired little house at the end of Maple Row, worked the overnight shift at a diner off the highway, and saved every crumpled tip in a coffee can labeled culinary-school in handwriting that still believed in things. My sister Sloane was 31 that summer, a widow of 13 months. Her husband, Reed, had died on the interstate the winter before. And grief does strange things to people. So when her minivan pulled into my drive at 9:15, with the muffler coughing like a sick lung, I told myself she just needed air. She came up my walk carrying Josie on her hip like a purse she'd grown tired of. Josie was 1, warm with a low fever, her cheek damp against my sister's collar. Micah was 3, asleep on his feet swaying. Piper was 5 and holding everyone's shoes. All 4 small pairs stacked against her chest like she'd already decided somebody in this family had to keep track of things. Behind them, Sloane dragged 2 black garbage bags of clothes up the steps and dropped them on my porch the way you drop off donations you don't want to be seen leaving. She smelled like cigarettes and vanilla lotion, that particular mix I would spend years unable to smell without going cold. Her eyes kept sliding back to the van, to the engine she'd left running. She had an appointment, she said. One she couldn't miss, one she couldn't bring them to. Then she pressed the diaper bag into my arms and gave me the smile that had gotten her out of everything since we were girls. Just 1 hour, Wren. I swear, I asked what kind of appointment starts on a Saturday. She was already walking backward down my steps, palms up, still smiling. Piper waved at the van until it turned the corner, and then she looked up at me and asked if there were popsicles. There were, and that was our whole afternoon. Popsicles melting down small wrists, cartoons, a fever that broke by 4. I didn't know it yet, but that was the last simple afternoon of my life, the last one before hour became a word I couldn't say without flinching. At 6 I called her, at 7 I called again. By 10 o'clock, I was standing at my front window with Josie asleep on my shoulder, watching every set of headlights come up Maple Row, and watching every single one of them keep going. The first night, I told myself she'd lost track of time. By Sunday, her voicemail was full. By Monday, it wouldn't ring at all, just a dead click, the sound of a number that had decided to stop existing. I want to be honest about something, because I've watched people hear this story and wonder how I didn't see it coming. I didn't. Years later, I understood that 2 garbage bags of clothes are not what you pack for 1 hour. You pack a diaper bag for 1 hour. You pack a life for something else. But I was 26, and she was my sister, and I had spent my whole childhood believing that smile. That kind of trust doesn't come with a receipt. I paid for it anyway. It cost me 12 years. On Tuesday, her landlord let me into her apartment, mostly because she owed him rent and hoped I'd cover it. The place wasn't ransacked. It was empty. Closets bare, hangers gone, the crib already sold to somebody off a classifieds board. The neighbor across the hall told me a truck had come the Thursday before the Thursday before. She had packed out her entire life while I pulled a double shift, and then, 2 days later, she'd driven her children to my porch like the last errand on a moving checklist. That week, my mother sat in my kitchen with her hands folded and said the thing she would keep saying for years. "She'll come back, Wren. She's their mother." Nana Aliner said it the way you'd state a law of nature gravity, something only a fool would argue with. I wanted so badly to be that kind of fool. I called the police. In those first hours, a tired sergeant explained that grown adults are allowed to leave, that it isn't a crime to hand your kids to family. But as the days stacked up, it was a hospital social worker who finally told me the truth in plain English, and the truth had teeth. I had no legal standing, none. I couldn't enroll them, insure them, or consent to their care. And if the wrong person made the wrong phone call, if anyone reported 3 children living with a woman who wasn't their guardian, the county would open a file, and while they sorted out what I was to these kids, the kids could be taken from me. Not because I'd done anything wrong. Because on paper, I was no one. The first wall wasn't money, it was a clipboard. Kindergarten registration for Piper, 5 years old, 1 line near the bottom. Signature of parent or legal guardian. I stood in that school office holding a pen I had no right to use. The secretary was kind about it. She'd seen it before, she said. Aunts and grandmas and big sisters, and she slid the form back and lowered her voice like she was passing me a secret. "You're going to need paperwork, honey." And paperwork, it turned out, needed my sister. The clipboard was a warning. The emergency room was the verdict. 14 months in, Micah 4 by then caught a chest cold that turned mean at 2 in the morning. His small ribs pulled with every breath. I drove him in, and somewhere between triage and the treatment room, a nurse asked the question that rearranged my life. "Are you his mother?" "No." "Legal guardian?" "No." They treated him anyway because that's what emergency rooms do. But I sat in my car in the parking garage as the sun came up. Micah finally asleep against the window, and I made the first cold decision of my life. Monday morning, I would hire a lawyer. I'd been keeping the truth from the children as gently as I could, but that night, tucking Piper onto the fold-out couch, in a room that still held my cookbooks, she looked up at me and asked the question I'd been dreading. "Did we do something wrong?" "No, baby," I said. "Somebody did, but it was never you." The lawyer told me there was a clean road. She also told me it ran straight through the one place my sister was hiding. Her name was Camille Boone, and she talked to me the way you'd talk to someone standing on a ledge slow level, no sudden movements. The cleanest road, she said, was legal custody through the juvenile court, and I could get most of the way there on my own. Abandonment was a real finding. With a mother who'd vanished and couldn't be located. The court could grant me guardianship on notice. By publication, a legal ad run in a paper Sloane would never read without her signature at all. I remember the relief of that, brief and bright as a match. Then Camille set the match down. "Understand me," she said. "Publication gets you guardianship. It doesn't get you peace. A mother can come back years from now and try to pry the whole thing open. If you ever want a door that stays shut, adoption. Someday the strongest lock in the world is her own voluntary consent, signed and notarized, freely given." She looked at me over her glasses. "The trouble is, that lock only exists if she agrees to hand it to you." So the question became where she was. I hired a private investigator with money I did not have half up front, drawn out of the coffee can. Culinary school crossed out in my head with every bill I counted onto his desk. He found her in 9 days. She was working a lounge outside Amarillo under her maiden name, as if our family were a coat she'd checked at the door and forgotten. I arranged 2 days off, and I drove 900 miles. She met me at a motel off Route 66, because she didn't want me seeing where she actually lived. 14 months, and my sister looked both better and worse. New acrylic nails. A jacket that cost real money. And her eyes had checked out of our family, the way you check out of a room you've already paid for and stopped caring about. I set the papers on the little table by the window. A notary was coming at 3. Camille had booked a mobile service. Sloane flipped through the pages like a menu. She didn't ask about Josie's fever. She didn't ask whether Micah's lungs had healed, or whether Piper still held everyone's shoes. She didn't ask their names, as if she'd worried she might have to hear them. She asked what was in it for her. I need to be careful here, because this is the part I kept sealed for 11 years, and I'm going to keep it sealed a little longer tonight. There was a price. She wrote it down herself, on motel stationery, in the looping handwriting our mother used to praise at the kitchen table when we were girls. I read what she wrote, and something in me went very quiet and never got loud again. I paid it. The notary came at 3, watched her sign, pressed the seal into the page. And while I was sliding the folder into my bag, Sloane lit a cigarette and smiled at me through the smoke. "You always wanted to play house with my kids," she said. "Congratulations." I stopped at the door. I told her the truth, level as a shelf. "I'm not playing anything, I'm just the one who stayed." Then I drove 900 miles home, with a folder on the passenger seat worth more than my car. I pulled into Maple Row a little after midnight. I didn't go to bed. I stood in the doorway of the children's room and listened to them breathe Josie's small snore, Micah's whistle. Piper turned toward the wall with one arm thrown over her sister, like she was guarding her even in sleep. What Sloane made me trade for that signature, I'll tell you when I can say it out loud. We're not there yet. But I took the stationery home. And I sealed it inside an envelope with a strip of packing tape. And I inked one word in the corner so I'd never have to open it to remember where it came from. Amarillo. I did not open that envelope for 11 years. Not because I forgot what was inside. I sealed it because I knew exactly what those few lines would do to 3 children if they ever read them in their mother's own hand. The juvenile court granted me guardianship that fall on abandonment. By publication, a legal notice run 3 weeks in a paper my sister would never hold. The next 10 years happened the way bread rises, slowly and then all at once. I'll be honest about one thing, because I don't want you thinking I'm a saint who never reached for the lock. 5 years in, I filed to terminate Sloane's parental rights so I could adopt them outright. It cost $4,000. I earned $4 at a time, and it died on the table. She surfaced just long enough to hire an hourly lawyer, file one objection, and evaporate again, and the case stalled on service and searches until the court dismissed it for want of prosecution. The law leaves a door cracked for mothers. I learned to sleep next to a cracked door. Some nights I still checked the locks twice, as if a checked lock could keep out a person who'd only ever come in through the mail. Life got good anyway. That's the part people forget to expect. I opened the Hearthstone Bakery 6 years ago with a small business loan and a second-hand mixer I named Gladys, who groaned like an old dog every time I asked her to knead. I bought the house on Maple Row, outright the same tired house, because those kids had already survived enough leaving. And I wasn't going to be one more thing that packed up and disappeared on them. I baked, by a rough count, something like 4,000 lunch boxes. I sat through stomach flu and a broken wrist and 2 science fairs. And one middle school heartbreak that required emergency pancakes at 11 at night. They called me Wren, not Mom. I never asked for more than that, and most days it was enough, and on the days it wasn't, I kept that to myself. There was one thing I never got used to. Every year, always in June, a single blank postcard arrived in my mailbox. No message, no signature, a beach in Florida, a casino in Nevada. A cold mountain somewhere I couldn't name. The first one frightened me so badly I called Camille, and she told me gently that there is nothing in the law you can do about a blank rectangle. So I stopped showing anyone. I bundled them with a rubber band, dropped them in the junk drawer, and tried not to understand what they meant. Somebody out there knew our address. Somebody was keeping count. One postcard a year that said nothing at all, and said everything. I'll admit something I've never told the kids. One night, deep in I took the old application out of the drawer, the culinary-school one, the ink gone soft. The coffee can dream in handwriting that still believed in things. I let myself sit with it. I let myself be angry, for exactly 5 minutes, at the life I might have had, the woman I might have become in some kitchen far from here. Then I folded it back up and put it away. Because Josie had a spelling test in the morning and grief on a schedule is a luxury nobody in my house could afford. I'm not proud of the 5 minutes. I'm not ashamed of them either. That was as human as I let myself get. Then, 8 months ago, my mother had a stroke at her kitchen table, a crossword half finished and the kettle still warm. Nana Aliner was 71. At the funeral, Josie held my hand so tight my ring left a mark I could still see the next morning. And I kept thinking. My mother died still believing her other daughter would walk in late, the way Sloane had been late to everything her whole life. She didn't come. The will surprised no one who'd watched my mother's last years. The farmhouse on the edge of town, and the insurance, and a lifetime of never buying anything for herself. All went into a trust for her 3 grandchildren for college, for a start in life. I was named trustee. Sloane's name appeared exactly once, in the flat, careful sentence lawyers, right when a person has been thought about and deliberately left out. But here's the thing about probate that nobody warns you about. The law is thorough. An estate has to notify the heirs, even the disinherited ones, even the missing ones. So a statutory notice went out by certified mail to my sister's last known address. Forwarded God knows how many times. Like a flare fired over a dark ocean. For 3 months, nothing. Then, on a Tuesday in March, at 10 in the morning, a rental car parked in front of the Hearthstone Bakery. She pushed open my door like a customer. A little bell I'd hung for the children's sake announced her the way it announced everyone, cheerful and stupid. She wore a white wool coat, the kind you wear when you've never carried a toddler with a bloody nose. And under the salon polish she was still my sister, same chin. Same tilt of the head when she wanted something. The morning rush had cleared. It was just me, the ovens, Gladys ticking as she cooled, and 12 years walking toward my counter. "Hello, Wren," she said. She did it well, I'll give her that. Her eyes went shiny right on cue. She'd been sick, she told me. She'd been getting better for a long time. She was finally in a place she actually said that, in a place where she could be what her children needed. She thought about them every single day. I looked at her nails while she said it, fresh French tips. I thought about a rubber band full of blank postcards in my junk drawer, and I asked her one question. "Where were you when Mom was buried?" She blinked. For half a second the performance stuttered, and I watched her decide not to answer. Instead she leaned on my counter, lowered her voice, and got to it. "I want my babies back." Josie was 2 blocks away doing pre-algebra in a bedroom I'd painted twice. I felt the old heat climb my neck, and I set it down because I'd had 12 years of practice setting things down. I told her the children had school, routines, a whole life, and none of it would be renegotiated over my pastry case. If she wanted to talk, there were proper channels. The shine in her eyes dried up like it had a switch. "You'll hear from someone," she said. A week later I did. The someone was a process server who apologized twice, and the papers came in 2 layers, like a bad cake. The first layer was the violin. A petition for custody of Micah and Josie, and a fight over Piper's senior year. Her lawyer was a man named Preston Vance, and his petition used words the way tabloids use headlines. It said I had obtained custody through a forged consent, that the signature I drove 900 miles for was fake. It called 12 years of my life a wrongful retention. In one paragraph, the one written to be quoted in the local paper, it used the word kidnapping. The second layer arrived at the courthouse the same week, and that one was the wallet. A challenge to my mother's will, claiming I had poisoned a sick old woman's mind against her firstborn. And that filing told me the whole truth, because if the will fell, the trust fell with it, and if my mother died with no valid will, her estate would split between her 2 daughters, and the children would get nothing. The custody case was the show, the will case was the point. She didn't want the kids, she wanted half a farmhouse. She just learned, somewhere in 12 years, that the fastest way to a woman's savings is to reach for her children first. Camille laid the forgery problem out for me plainly. A notarized signature is hard to fake and harder to disprove, except that when she went looking, she found the mobile notary from Amarillo had died 2 years back, and the notary's journal, the little book that logs every seal, had never made it to the county archive, gone. Which meant the notarized copy in the court file could be called a lie by anyone shameless enough to say it. And the only thing on earth that could prove otherwise was an envelope on the top shelf of my closet that no one had ever seen. The court appointed a guardian ad litem to speak for the children, a calm woman named Marisol Vega, sensible shoes, canvas tote. At our first meeting she was courteous and careful, and underneath the courtesy I heard where she started from. A mother is a mother. Blood is blood. She wasn't wrong to start there, most people do. The judge, following the same old gravity, granted Sloane 2 supervised hours a week. Then the town got the simpler story, and small towns run on simple stories. At the church potluck, my Aunt Cora cornered me by the dessert table, loud enough for half the folding tables to hear. She's their mother, Wren. Blood is blood. What kind of woman keeps children from their own mother? I could have said 12 years. I could have said blank postcards, or garbage bags, or a boy wheezing in an ER with no one to sign for him. But you can't win against blood is blood in a room like that. So I picked up the pie server and gave her the only true thing that fit in one breath. You're right, Cora, I'm not their mother. I'm just the one who stayed. It didn't land as a win, it wasn't meant to, it was meant to be true. That week the tide turned in the bakery. A wedding cake, canceled by voicemail with no reason. A couple of 1-star reviews, from accounts that had never reviewed anything but me. 2 regulars who suddenly took their coffee across the street, and their eyes somewhere else. Then on Thursday, Camille called, and her voice had gravel in it. Vance had subpoenaed the trust records, every account, every receipt. He's not building a custody case, she said. He's taking inventory. I stood on the wrong side of the glass at the Family Services Center and watched my sister meet her children, and I will tell you plainly. She was magnificent. She came with gifts that proved somebody had done homework. The exact sneakers Micah had posted about. A sketchbook in the brand of pens Josie saved her allowance for. A vintage band, shirt for Piper the band from the poster over her bed. Social media is a gift registry, if you're shameless enough to shop it. Josie glowed like a struck match, sitting close, then closer. Showing her mother a phone full of drawings while Sloane leaned in, delighted by every swipe. Micah lasted 20 minutes as a statue, and then thawed by degrees. Because a 15-year-old boy is not built to be handed the right sneakers by a pretty woman who calls him tall. Only Piper stayed cool, polite, upright, answering questions like a witness who'd read her rights. Here's the part I told no one for weeks. Before Sloane walked into that playroom, I saw her in the hallway through a second window, where she didn't know she had an audience. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her coat, twice, the way you smooth a tablecloth that won't lie right. Something in my chest moved an inch, and I hated it. Then the door opened, and the shaking vanished, and the smile arrived, and the show began. I have never been sure which one was real. I've come to think they both were, taking turns. 2 Saturdays later, I found out who Piper's phone had been talking to at 1 a.m. I was delivering a sheet cake across town when I saw them through the front glass of a diner, my girl in a corner booth, and across from her. In sunglasses she didn't need indoors, my sister. No caseworker within a mile. Unsupervised, in plain violation of a court order barely a month old. On the table between them sat a small wrapped box, a ribbon sliding across the formica under Sloane's manicure like a chess move. I didn't slam through the door. I want credit for that someday. I walked in, said good afternoon to both of them, and told Piper the cake in my van needed a second pair of hands. Sloane sat back with a small smile and let me collect my own kid, and that smile followed me out the door like a hand on my back. In the van, Piper held the wrapped box in her lap and stared at the windshield. 17 and furious and frightened, and then she pulled the pin. She told me things, Wren. The words came out flat, rehearsed, like she'd been holding them since the booth. She says you paid her 12 years ago. She says you gave her money to stay away. That you wanted us for yourself. The road noise got very loud. Because that is exactly what a lie looks like when a professional builds it one true bolt driven through the center. And everything around it bent to bear the opposite load. Yes. Money had moved between me and my sister, once in our lives. And she had taken the worst day I ever lived. Filed the serial numbers off it. And handed it to my daughter as proof that her whole childhood had been a purchase. Is it true? Piper asked, quiet now. Is it true? A yes would poison her. A no would be a lie, and she'd smell it because she'd been reading my face since she was 5 years old. So I reached for the middle, the smooth stone I'd been handing her for a decade, and the middle finally failed me. It's more complicated than that, I said. She nodded, slow, the way you nod at a stranger. That's not a no. We drove the rest of the way with the radio off. Something in our house shifted that afternoon, nothing dramatic, just a door that used to stay open, staying closed. I almost didn't go to the cemetery that Sunday. I'm glad I did, and I'm not. I go the first Sunday of every month, my mother's stone, and Reed's beside it, because somebody should. It was raining thin and cold, and there was already a figure at Reed's grave, so I stopped under the maple before she could hear me. Sloane. No audience, no camera-ready coat. A gas station, umbrella and flat shoes, kneeling in the wet grass in front of her husband's name, crying the ugly kind that doesn't photograph. I caught pieces over the rain, that she was sorry. That she couldn't breathe in that house after the accident, with 3 babies and his boots still by the door. And then one whole sentence, clear as a bell, that I have turned over every night since. After the first year, there was no version of me coming back that wasn't a monster, so I stayed gone. I stood under that maple, with the carnations going heavy in my hand. And for one long minute, I saw the whole thing from inside her skin. 31, widowed, drowning. Raised her entire life to be the pretty one somebody rescues. And no one left to do the rescuing. I almost stepped out. I almost said her name the old way, without armor in it. Then she stood, brushed the grass off her knees, looked down at Reed's stone, and her voice changed back into the one from my bakery. That house should have been half mine, she told her dead husband. Mom owed me that. She fixed her collar and walked to the rental car through the rain. I stayed under the maple until she was gone. I put the carnations down. And I stopped feeling like a monster for what I was about to do. The settlement offer came by certified mail 3 days later. She'd withdraw the custody petition. She'd drop the will contest. She'd sign a full, permanent surrender of her parental rights, the exact document I had chased for a decade, notarized, ironclad. In exchange, $80,000 from me personally, not the trust. And my resignation as trustee, pay her, seal it, call the silence protection. And wait for the next certified letter, in 5 years or 10, when the silence came up for renewal. I sat at my kitchen table that night with the checkbook open, and the lamp making a small island of the whole decision. I'd already done the arithmetic on the back of a bakery order slip. I could cover it barely, ugly, with the shop's line of credit and a second mortgage on a house I'd only just finished making mine. My hand knew how to write those numbers. That was the part that frightened me. My hand had done it before, in a motel outside Amarillo. And it had learned that a family could be bought back for a while if you were willing to keep paying. $80,000 for my children to stay my children. And the furnace cycled twice while I sat there, and I understood the arrangement I was about to sign. Not a purchase, a lease, renewable. At her price, forever. Around midnight, the stairs creaked, and Piper came down in her old robe. Instead of going to the refrigerator, she pulled out the chair across from me, the chair she hadn't sat in for weeks. She looked at the checkbook. And at the letter beside it that I hadn't hidden fast enough. And she read the whole battlefield in about 4 seconds. Because she's mine, even where it's inconvenient. That's what she really came for, she said, not a question. I didn't insult her by pretending. And then my 17-year-old took my whole operation apart in one breath. If you pay her again, she'll come back again. You know that, right? Again. The word sat down between us with its shoes off, completely at home. She'd known since the diner, maybe before, and she'd been waiting to see what I'd do with the truth this time. Then she said the thing that ended 11 years of policy at my kitchen table. Stop protecting me from my own life. I want you to understand, she didn't just say it and go back to bed. She got up, went to the junk drawer, and came back with something small in her hand. One of the blank postcards. She'd taken it out of the rubber band weeks ago, and I'd never noticed, because I'd taught myself not to look at them. I found these when I was 12, she said. I never told you. I used to think they were from nobody. She turned it over and set it in the lamplight and pointed at the postmark stamped across the corner. A date, a place. She always knew where we were, Wren, every June. She had our address in her pocket the whole time, and she sent a picture of a beach. Her voice didn't shake, that was the worst part. She wasn't lost, she chose the beach. I had spent a decade telling this child her mother got lost. And my child had been holding the proof in a junk drawer, protecting me from it, the same way I'd been protecting her. We'd been standing on opposite sides of the same closed door for years, each sure the other one couldn't take what was behind it. I closed the checkbook. At 3 a.m, I stood in my closet doorway and looked up at the gray box behind the winter blankets, the fireproof one, dented on a corner. Where everything that proved my family was real had lived since the year I became a guardian. 3 birth certificates. The custody order with its raised seal, 12 years of receipts. And flat on the bottom, like a foundation stone, 1 manila envelope with a strip of amber packing tape and a city inked in the corner. At 9 the next morning, I set the box on Camille's desk, still cold from my trunk. No settlement, I said, and I heard my own voice come out the way I say oven temperatures flat, exact, not up for discussion. I bought her silence once, it expired. I'm done renting my family back 1 decade at a time. Then I turned the key, took out the envelope, and told her what was inside out loud in order for the first time in 11 years. Camille didn't touch it for a moment. Lawyers develop a reverence for paper the way bakers do for starters. She could smell what it would do. Then she walked me through the cost at a funeral's pace, because she owed me that. Once it's on the exhibit list, Vance sees it. Once it's evidence, it's public record. Sealing requests fail more than they succeed. Reporters can pull it, neighbors can pull it. And one day 5 years, 10 the kids can pull it. Or some helpful stranger pulls it for them. She looked at me. Once it's in, Wren, they will read it someday, all of them. Then they'll hear it from me first, I said, before any courtroom does. The week before trial, Marisol Vega filed her report. Camille, read me the parts that mattered over the phone. The children were deeply bonded to their aunt, whose home was the only one 2 of them had ever known. Removal would be devastating. She recommended the current arrangement continue. I was breathing again by the 3rd sentence. The woman who'd started at blood had walked through my house. Seen the growth chart penciled inside the pantry door and the shelf of science fair ribbons, and let the truth move her. That's all I'd ever wanted from anyone to look, and then to let it move them. And then Camille read the last line, the one aimed at me. The guardian's persistent lack of transparency with the children regarding their mother's departure is noted with concern. I didn't argue with it. You don't argue with a level, it just tells you what's out of true. The night before trial I didn't sleep, and I didn't try. I sat on the edge of my bed, with the envelope in my lap. And through the wall, I could hear Josie's white noise machine. The ocean sound she'd slept to since she was 4. In 9 hours, a judge was going to decide who her mother was. And I was the one bringing the shovel. The county courtroom smells like old oak and radiator dust, and the ceiling fan has clicked on every 3rd rotation since probably Eisenhower. Judge Warren Ellison presided 22 years on that bench. The gallery held a scatter of townspeople who decided their errands could wait. And in the 2nd row, in the blouse I'd ironed at 6 that morning, sat Piper, spine straight, hands folded, watching everything. Sloane took the stand in dove gray, and gave the finest performance of her life. She had been ill. She touched her collarbone when she said it, letting the word do its own insinuating. She had gotten help, gotten steady, tried for years to find her way home to her children. And then, chin trembling at exactly the right frequency, she found me at the respondent's table and told the judge the story I'd heard assembling itself for months. Her little sister had always wanted what she had. Her little sister had come to her at her lowest, waving money, hungry for a family of her own. She paid me to disappear, Your Honor. And that signature, they keep showing everyone it is not mine. I watched the gallery lean toward her like plants toward a window, and I understood, with a strange scientific calm, that she might actually win this. Vance turned to Camille with the satisfaction of a man an inch from the finish line. Your witness. He came at me pleasantly, the way you'd approach a pie you intend to drop. Hadn't I struggled to have a family of my own? Hadn't I hunted his grieving client down through a private investigator? Hadn't money quietly changed hands? He set each brick a little higher, and then he laid down the last one with the flourish he'd been saving all trial. Isn't it true, Ms. Calloway, that you bought yourself 3 children for $15,000? The fan clicked. Somewhere behind me, a purse zipper went still. I looked at Piper in the second row, my girl, who had told me at a midnight kitchen table to stop protecting her from her own life. Then I looked at Judge Ellison, and I heard my voice come out level, the voice I use when the ovens are on fire and panic is a luxury. No, sir. And I'd like to enter something into evidence. Vance objected on principle. Camille was already at the bench with the exhibit list, where the envelope had sat, disclosed and fought over for weeks. Ellison waved them through the lawyer weather and opened it himself, with a letter knife, unhurried, the way judges do everything. 3 things came out onto the bench. The first was the notarized consent. The original raised seal, signed in blue ink while a notary and I both watched the twin of the copy Vance had spent months calling a forgery. The second was a wire receipt from the same week, $15,000. Drawn from a savings account labeled in my own optimistic handwriting from another life, culinary-school. And the third was a single sheet of motel stationery. And I knew every loop of the handwriting he was reading. Because I'd read it 10,000 times before I taped the flap. You want papers? 15,000, and I'll sign whatever you put in front of me. Don't come looking for me. Tell them I'm dead if it's easier. Don't send me their pictures, I don't want to watch them grow up. S. The courtroom went quiet, but courtrooms are often quiet. This was different. This was the silence of a man behind a bench reading a mother's price list. Ellison read it twice. Sloane had gone the color of unbaked dough. She asked me for 1 hour, I said to the judge, but not only to him. I gave her children 12 years. The rest of that story is in your hands now. He took off his reading glasses, folded them, and looked at me for a long moment. Ms. Calloway, he said, into the quietest room in Ohio. Do they know? In the second row, Piper leaned forward. Not yet, I said. He held my eyes, and something passed between 2 people who each knew the weight of paper. Then he adjourned for lunch and said, quietly, that the afternoon could wait until the family had had its hour. There is a conference room off that courthouse hallway with a wobbly table and a window painted shut, and that is where my family actually happened. Mrs. Whitfield drove Micah and Josie over when I called. Piper was already there, arms crossed, pacing. I sat the 3 of them down. Put the copies face down on the table, with my hand flat on top. And paid the bill I'd been running from for 11 years. I told them about the clipboard and the emergency room. About a private investigator and a motel and a signature I drove 900 miles for. About the blank postcards, and here Piper's jaw tightened, because she'd carried that piece alone. And I told them why I'd never said any of it. Because I was afraid they'd do the math a lie can do in a child's head, and decide they'd been bought that love with a receipt behind it isn't love. Then I turned the papers over. Because they were going to hear it in a transcript someday, no matter what I did. And I wanted my voice to get there first. Josie made a sound I will hear for the rest of my life, and folded into Micah, who held her and stared at the wall with his jaw working. And Piper read it standing up twice, then set it down and looked at me. You let me spend 12 years wondering what I did wrong. Quiet, not a shout. The shout would have hurt less. You knew, and you let me wonder. I didn't defend myself, because she was right, and because I'd finally found the flaw in the load-bearing beam. I hadn't only been protecting them. I'd been protecting the version of me that never had to watch their faces do what their faces were doing now. I treated the truth like it was mine to carry. I told the three of them. It was yours, I'm sorry. It took a courtroom to make me brave. Then I slid the copies across the wobbly table to Piper, all of them, and put the choosing where it should have lived all along. You decide when the little ones read the rest. You, not me, not a judge, not her. Josie wiped her face on her sleeve and asked the only question left in the world. Did you ever want to give us back? Not for 1 hour. The afternoon session took 40 minutes, with the original consent, the notary's seal, and the court's handwriting examiner on standby. The forgery claim wasn't merely weak, it was perjury with a runway. And Vance could smell his own malpractice premiums. After a whispered conference, his client withdrew the forgery allegation on the record and conceded the signature was hers. Which meant conceding the note. Which meant conceding the price. Judge Ellison denied the petition from the bench and made a finding of abandonment. 12 years, he said, without one phone call, one dealer, or one birthday card, is not an illness or an estrangement. It is a decision, renewed daily. He said the word decision like a gavel. The will contest went down with it. You cannot claim your mother was poisoned against you, while your own handwriting sits in the record explaining exactly how you priced your children. No prison, no handcuffs. Life doesn't hand you that scene, and I'd stopped needing it. In the hallway afterward, Sloane came past us, Vance 3 careful steps behind. She slowed when she reached Piper. My girl stood very straight, holding her grandmother's posture and my ironing, and she looked at her mother the way you look at weather moving off. Sloane's mouth opened, and whatever was in it she swallowed. She turned to me instead, and for 2 seconds the performance was gone, and it was just my sister, tired, 43, holding a purse in both hands. You were always better at keeping things than me, she said, even them. Then she walked out through the double doors into the June light. And the 3 kids watched her go. And not one of them moved a foot in her direction. The clicking fan was louder than their goodbye, 6 weeks later. With the abandonment finding on the books and Marisol Vega's blessing in the file. We filed to terminate Sloane's rights and adopt Micah and Josie. Nobody objected. Nobody appeared. Piper turned 18 that October. Aged out of the whole question, and then sat down at my kitchen table on a Sunday night, slid a printout across to me and said, "File 1 for me too." Adult adoption. She'd researched it herself, the way she researches everything, 16 tabs open. And change my last name while you're at it. Then, because she saw my face, she looked at her hands and finished it. You're not just the one who stayed, Wren. You're my mom. The paperwork's just late. It was 12 years late. I signed it anyway, and I didn't manage a steady hand, and no one at that table held it against me. If you take one thing from my 12 years, let it be this. Blood tells you where you came from. But the people who stay, who show up at 4 in the morning with a nebulizer, who tell you the truth, even when it costs them the version of themselves they love best, they tell you where you belong. Family isn't the name on your birth certificate. It's the name on 4,000 lunch boxes. It's who's still standing in the kitchen when every set of headlights has kept on going. The gray box lives on the counter now, unlocked, mostly empty. We don't keep each other's truths in this house anymore, we just keep each other. And then this June a letter came, looping handwriting, addressed to all 3 kids, postmarked Nevada. I didn't open it, and I didn't screen it. I set it on the kitchen table with the bills, told them what it was, and left the room. Through the door, I heard the 3 of them decide together, voices low, 3 kids wiser about their mother than I ever let them be. They put it in the junk drawer, unopened beside the blank postcards. Her hour is finally up. but something tells me Nevada isn't done writing.